Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline. Matt Offenbacher and I here again in the lab, aka, well, not really in the lab, but sometimes they reference a lab as a studio. Studio's a lab.
Yeah.
It's where you get the work done.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we do have a nice lab just on the other side of these walls, behind the glass.
Yeah.
Which I guess kind of brings me to a question, Matt. What is there any latest and greatest in the lab? Any cool equipment that we've got? Any cool testing that you and the team are doing right now that's sort of unique or different?
So, I mean, the big one is we have a new GC by GC. So we probably talked about GCMS in sort of our analytical series.
Yeah.
So gas chromatography mass spectroscopy, which is always difficult to pronounce, basically kind of breaks down organic components into their like molecular constituents, and it can tell you like down to parts per billion what's there. So, wow. You know, if you need to know what's in a base oil or something like that, like that's your tool. It's super powerful for troubleshooting and all kinds of things. Well, a GC by GC has a second coil, if you will. So, like, how this works is you got this big loop, and as the material goes through, it's sort of separate out where, like, a very general description would be the lighter stuff moves faster than the heavier stuff, and then you detect it by mass using fancy stuff.
Gotcha.
But sometimes you miss things. So the cool deal is the second loop, basically you run it through and then you run it through another one, and it sort of compares what it sees, and they call it like two-dimensional analysis. And so you pick up a bunch more things that you may have missed the first go around.
Got it.
So the resolution is really, really tight, and you know, from some of the things we've been able to see, just, you know, when you spend this much money on a piece of equipment, you normally like get samples tested, get an idea of what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's like you could tell where someone bought their diesel, basically, if you took it from the mud.
Dang.
So we're excited about that, and then I would say that we're excited about what we don't know yet, because every single one of these pieces of equipment, I would say we buy it for a reason, and after about 6 months, we're doing something totally different than what we thought all the time. So, you know, with the XRF, you know, $100,000 plus machine, our goal was to do mostly quality control on barite and identify, you know, unknown materials.
Right.
But then, lo and behold, it became abundantly clear on like tool failure analysis that it was helping us tremendously narrow down, you know, kind of going back to prior podcast episodes, like, hey, this is a lot of the stuff that's causing RSS to fail is casing constituents. And I could tell that from the elemental analysis. I didn't buy it for that. I didn't know how useful it would be. So most of these fancy tools, given, you know, we've got a PhD analytical chemist, we've got some other people, they'll come up with new methods to find things that we haven't imagined yet. So that's the part I get really excited about.
Yeah.
So check in about 6 months.
Interesting.
But that's why there's all those boxes and crates by the wall, is we're still getting all that set up.
I bet when the lab sees a bunch of boxes and stuff come in, it's just like Christmas.
That's kind of like,
oh,
you see a little smile on their face, like, oh boy, I can't wait to unpack this, you know?
Oh, that's cool. Well, right on. It's always great to add more to the lab, and yeah, again, we'll check back in a few months and see if anything's come that unexpected from our new toy.
Yeah.
Matt, a conversation that we're gonna have today talking about multilaterals. Again, something brought up. I don't know if we talked about it specifically, but kind of unique. I mean, most of us are used to drilling horizontal wells, and depending on, you know, maybe international or Canada, you know, in the U.S. it's not maybe as common, but the reality is if you drill an intermediate, there's ways to drill several laterals from one intermediate. And so kind of breaking that down, characterizing the different types and maybe some challenges, and then figuring out from sort of the mud standpoint where that puts us and some things we need to consider if that well design is being put in place. So what do you think, Matt? Should be fun, huh?
Yeah, and I think I don't know if we've ever actually discussed this in a lot of detail, so I'm like, wow, you know, we're over 300 episodes in, and there's still new things to talk about. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Well, Yeah, let's kind of define, how would you describe what a multilateral is?
So, I mean, it sort of describes itself. However, I'll qualify. I mean, you think about it, you've got this one main wellbore, sometimes called the mother bore.
Nice. I had never heard that, but I'll use it now.
You know, arguably you drill that, and then you drill a lateral away from it. Not necessarily so, in effect, a sidetrack, but you keep both open. But you could multi means more than one, so you could just drill a vertical well and then drill a horizontal out. You could drill several laterals out. So there's a lot of different ways to basically drill out and then extend or drill sideways from there.
Okay.
So that's sort of the broad concept. And usually what you're how you're defining when to do this, trying to get more reservoir exposure off the same monobore. I think, really the relatable thing for us is horseshoe wells, right? Because we're drilling back, we're trying to eliminate one of the vertical, surface intermediate mother bores, if you will.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of the advantage of eliminating some of those to get some other targets. It may be that you're just trying to make a well economic by like, hey, I'm going to add a couple more secondary targets on here. But a lot of the way these multilaterals are defined, or one way they're sort of categorized, is actually the junction or how you kick off. And that may be that I might just drill an open hole and then like do an open hole sidetrack and drill another one and leave it there.
Yeah. And
that's got to be like a really competent formation, right? But all my production's commingled. It comes in through one set of production tubing, and off we go. But then you can take it further. Like probably what most people would be more familiar with is I drill encase the well, and then I mill out a window, sidetrack, and then that's my other lateral. And depending on, once again, the competency of the formation and what you're trying to do, you might drop a liner there where there's no support at the junction, right? So there's still risk of collapse where the two separate, but you've got something kind of holding the formation open.
Yeah.
And then it can go on from there to there's this group, the Technology for the Advancement of Multilaterals, years ago, sort of tried to imagine everything that could come up, and they came up with levels of 1 through 6. I'll let our listeners Google that and look up the pictures, but you could have something that's so complex where you actually have isolated pressure isolated first lateral and second lateral, and then separate production tubing, so you could actually manage either interval or lateral separately as far as production or what you're going to do, how you're going to produce it. Mm-hmm. And even this gets even more expensive and complicated with respect to smart completions, if you will. So you might have a downhole choke that isolates one part. And anyways, it's an elaborate mess, and I'm going to let people do their own research on that if they want to learn more. Yeah. But the whole point is you can add all kinds of jewelry and hardware and make these pretty elaborate in a really critical area. Yeah. A lot of what you're going to see on land is I drilled into it and either dropped a liner or with no isolation at the junction, or maybe I didn't do anything at all, which we might call barefoot. So like one of my experiences with multilaterals was drilling Austin chalk wells in East Texas. And what did we do? We actually drilled the first lateral, and they just used old drill pipe. They didn't even use a liner, but it was perforated, and they just left that down there so that if the formation ever collapsed, there's still a pathway for the gas to come in. And then they just drilled the other lateral and drop pipe, same deal.
Wow.
So it was kind of like a poor boy completion, if you will.
Crazy.
So you can make these as expensive as you want, and then there's ways to do this on the cheap, is I guess the way I would describe it.
Sure. And so for those listening that are maybe just more used to U.S. unconventionals, where do you typically see this stuff?
The most common probably that you hear, and they call it a fishbone, right? So fishbone wells think of having a bunch of laterals. right? So like you just keep dropping, you drill your horizontal and then you just keep dropping down. And so it looks like a fishbone. You might have 6 or 7 of these things off of, attached to one main mother bore. So the Clear Fork Formation in Canada is probably the best known. It's obviously competent. It doesn't require, you don't have to frack it, or you can do this in lieu of fracturing, so you can save some money. That's probably like most common. I think you've got to have a competent formation, and you probably don't have to stimulate it, because how do you isolate everything to get pressures? If you have 2 laterals and you try and frack it, you're just going to blow out the shoe. So you got to have some way to isolate those things. And then the fancy stuff I described, obviously that's going to be offshore remote ops. You've got a big expensive operation. It could be that you've run out of slots on a platform, for example, and you want to keep producing from one wellbore, so you drill another one and set that junction. So those are I would say that probably the Clear Fork is the most obvious, but there are other places I mentioned, Austin Chalk occasionally, although I think completion techniques are changing there too.
Interesting.
So yeah, I would say, but they exist. They're around. A lot of it's going to be more conventional because you have some permeability there to produce it.
Okay.
A lot of the Middle East, those carbonate reservoirs and everything, very common there. And then another multilateral example, I guess, that I would as I talk about Canadians and Clear Fork, is SAG-D, right? So you drill 2 wells right next to each other, one above the other, and you eject steam in one to heat up this bitumen, hydrocarbon material to get it to flow, and then produce it out of another wellbore nearby. So that counts.
Yes.
And those actually may be 2 distinct separate wellbores, just kind of depending on hardware and everything.
You're right.
But yeah, so I would say those.
Okay.
Yeah.
What and so can you kind of elaborate more on different layouts? Because there's quite a few, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this is one where like you could go through this broad vocabulary. I sort of described that fishbone where you just, if you think about, a lot of it is going to be, are you drilling deeper down into a reservoir, or are you on the same plane, right? So let's say I drill 2 laterals, one's below the other, right? So you call that stacked. But it could be they could be opposite, right? So I'm drilling east on one, north on the other, same wellbore. So I'm just I sort of land my wellhead in the middle of this area. There could be you could drill your horizontal and then just start kicking off, side to side, staying on that same plane.
Right.
And so on and so forth, and this, that, and the other. But when you think about it, you're in the reservoir, and when you do those kinds of patterns, how much more reservoir exposure you're getting with one wellbore. Now, the assumption is that I could have just drilled that one thing and everything would have just flown it anyway from, 50 feet away.
Right.
But you're increasing production surface area, which obviously can improve the economics of your well if there's enough oil there to flow.
Right. So I guess, do you see is there a place where the unconventional world can adopt some of this profile, or were you saying with fracking it becomes more challenging?
It's pretty hard with respect to fracking. I think that, we are seeing people attempt different techniques where it may be possible. It just requires more hardware and more reliability. Yeah. And so, there are some people who are doing open hole fracks where you're using packers to isolate things, and you may be able to get away with that type of stimulation. There's it's certainly possible, but if you have to frack the well, especially with our ability to drill 2 laterals right next to each other, it may just be more straightforward to drill reasonably far, drill further than it would be to drill more broadly.
Right. Makes sense.
But never say never.
Yeah.
This stuff, technology changes, people try new things. I'm so intrigued by, even now with like the sort of horseshoe movement, like unconventionals weren't necessarily the first to drill horseshoe wells. I think I was I was involved in one over 10 years ago and just didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
But it was an offshore, really difficult to get to a target, so they weren't fracking everything. It was a little different, but like the directional work was there.
Yeah.
You know, and so like, but it's interesting to see. One, I think most people are getting comfortable with the fact that they're not that hard. But you also see you've got the early adopters, and then we have some customers who are drilling there first and still, you know, kind of antsy about it. And you know, the industry's done hundreds of these things now. Like
Right.
it's becoming just part of the playbook.
Yeah.
And so who's to say we don't bring some other things in as we get a little more sophisticated and or even if we knew we had the tool, it's just getting cheaper.
Right.
So
Yeah, time will tell, and as we evolve, and you know, the discussion around inventory and acreage and all that, again, just continues to be somewhat of a challenge as we look ahead. Yeah, some of this stuff might be adopted, and at the end of the day, if you can drill wells and get more reservoir exposure for less dollars per foot, ultimately the economics work, and that's what drives our industry. So
Yep.
You just never know. We'll
Yep.
persevere, and you know, we'll keep things interesting. That's one thing for sure. And with any sort of new profile or sort of new technology or a new way or a unique way of drilling always presents certain challenges. And so, Matt, I think it's important that we sort of wrap things up and just talk about the challenges and how we might approach some of these multilateral type wells from a mud standpoint.
yeah, I mean, one of them first and foremost is maybe more of a geology question, but there could be fluid components. It's the competency of your junction, right? So where those two where you kick off, if that doesn't stay open either from like a mud weight perspective or reactive material or what have you, if that's going to come in on you, you can't produce from it. You're going to have trouble getting back in there. Just any number of problems. And so then the question is, do you have to spend the money to support it, which adds cost, as we kind of talked about earlier with respect to those different types of junctions.
Yeah.
And with that comes just like the notion of fluid management, because a lot of these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill my well, or I'm going to drill one of my laterals, and I need to keep it open, and I probably can't get back in there. So from a just well control, that kind of thing question, a lot of these wells up in the Clear Fork or whatever, they're drilling these on the cheap. I mean, really cheap and prolific wells. But when they drill that like fishbone, when they get into it, a lot of times it's very hard to get back into it without, MWD or, just the BHA wanting to creep somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so it's basically the assumption is you're going to drill that. You're going to, whatever mud you leave in there is just going to be produced out eventually, or you may displace out to brine or something like that. But that hole needs to stay there. It needs to keep anything back, keep everything open, and it's going to be exposed there for a while while you drill another one past it. And so when you get into those sort of questions of fluids and formation, you've just got a lot more time before, we're used to just casing things off and cementing them as soon as we're done.
Right.
And you don't do any of that here. So, I mean, that's a big challenge from a just different, differences in formations and that sort of thing, and understanding where your risks lie.
Yeah.
And then I've already kind of mentioned getting back in, but stimulation can be a bit of a challenge. Let's say you do want to do something, trying to go in with coil or something like that. It's very difficult to be confident that you're going to be able to get back in one of those things, unless it's one of these special, with like a really expensive defined junction where you may actually have special tools that will help orient you into whichever. We don't do that on land really. So, if you drop a liner in there, that's it. You're probably not going to be able to get back into it.
Yeah.
So I would say those are kind of the big overhanging things. I mentioned, I've already mentioned that if you try and go back and work it over or stimulate, you're going to have challenges. You may just flat out not be able to do it. And then, to de-risk all of that just brings in a bunch more cost than potentially undermining the economics. So you've really got to balance how much am I going to spend to avoid risk relative to how much more money I can make if I don't have to do any of those things. Mm-hmm. So drilling practices come in, and I I think understanding your formations, generally they need to be really competent, I would say is a broad theme.
Yeah.
But that's probably one of those where everybody's like, I'll consider it, but me second,
Yeah.
So I would say that, the big part on the fluid side is managing your fluids. Just, oh no, I went on losses. Do I have any idea where I went on losses? Can I do anything about it?
Yeah.
And does it matter? And then keeping the hole open.
Right. Yeah, which I think kind of comes down to just contingency and planning, right? If this happens, then what? And just having enough product on location for, anything unexpected. But really, when it comes down to it, it's there's not a whole heck of a lot we need to think of above and beyond of what we already do. Kind of like horseshoe wells, it's like, what do we need to do on the mud? And it's like, keep it clean, pump hard enough to keep the hole clean.
Yeah, don't lose any.
Yeah, it's kind of like the sort of the basic 101 principles of drilling fluids, but always again, regardless of depending on the type of well you're drilling, it's always good to know what can happen and be ready for it. And so planning and communication at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you did remind me, I guess the other thing is in the same way like with a horseshoe well, because you do so much sliding, for example, if you're on a motor or those kinds of things, I don't think torque is as much of an issue necessarily, but, doing your hydraulics and certainly making sure that you have the ECD window you need.
Yeah.
Because if you go on loss, it's going to be that much harder to slide. If you're wholly dependent on pump rate and you don't have it,
yeah,
it's going to make it harder and harder to make that exit and get your lateral in. And so, there's just other sort of fundamentals that you think about that just think through the what ifs, like you said, do your planning, and then recognize what you can't control also.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think they're kind of interesting where they're applied, and it seems to be like, at least from my experience, it's like you either do this like really, really poor boy on the cheap, or you're spending gazillions of dollars on all this extra hardware, and there's like very little in between.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if those two will meet and we'll drill all of a sudden a bunch of them here on in the Permian or something like that. But anyway, good conversation, Matt. Always interesting. If anyone out there has any comments or thoughts or wants to add to the conversation, please reach out. If you've drilled any of these, it'd be cool to tell some wins or maybe even some horror stories of something that went wrong. Because, obviously the more the more complex you have in your well profile design, the more challenges can present themselves. So I'd be curious if anyone has any stories. You can reach us on LinkedIn, or if you'd like to email us at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. Be sure to check out the website, the tech tips on YouTube, and would be curious if you had any feedback on our cool advertising campaign with the videos we talked about last episode. You can check them out on LinkedIn. Just some unique ways to communicate our message to the broader audience of AES Drilling Fluids. And with that being said, everyone, take care. Until next time, be safe.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.